and you'll be good at flowing.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. This is the Community Revitalization Show. This is streaming live on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. It is brought to you by RCI Community Funds. And to give you a little bit of background, this is a new project moving into becoming a new company with a number of spin-offs before we even get off the ground. But our goal is to provide a series of investment funds that are dedicated to individual communities. And these communities we're selecting are what we are calling disinvested, meaning that for whatever reason, money has passed them by, but a little infusion of money in the right place, right time, we think can help these communities revive, rebuild, and become what they want to be. So, with that, I'm Carl Dakin. I'm a member of the RCI Community Funds team. My primary background is in raising money for anything new under the sun, and this is yet another new thing. I'm in my groove at the moment, but I'm going to hand the interrogation of our guest over to Steve, who knows Andrea for a long time, and Steve is another member. I'll let him introduce himself, and then we'll get into the rest of the program. But before I hand it off, this is live streamed, and we are hopeful today that everything is connected, which means that viewers, which just showed up on LinkedIn, I'll explain how this works. This is a great illustration. Don, good morning. Don is in our audience this morning. He got in through LinkedIn, and Don is an advisor to me on using LinkedIn and has helped me use it as a tool to tell my story, share information with my community, and to build my community. Uh, Anyone in the audience who can get on board can comment or ask questions during today's show. We invite you to do that because the show is for you. We can always get on the phone and chat amongst ourselves, but we want to invite the audience to be part of the conversation. So, Don, thanks for being here this morning. And as we said, comment or question as we go along. So that's how that works. And thank you, Don, for being my demo this morning on that particular aspect of the show. Steve, take it away from here.
Great. Thanks for the introductions. And I really look forward to the conversation next hour because we have my dear friend and an incredibly effective organizer and contributor to making our whole country better, Andrea Miller. So before I kick off, let me give you a little bit of perspective of why we've asked Andrea to join us. And also we'll talk a little bit more about how the work that she's doing and the work we're doing, we're building a bridge because our ultimate common denominator here is we want to improve and empower and help revitalize underserved, or as Carl said, disinvested communities, which, as we all know, there's way too many of them throughout the country. So our primary focus as a community fund is really to put the aggregate sources of capital to help bring into worthy community projects. So putting funds together is pretty conventional. We want to draw from a lot of different and growing and newer sources of capital. The other part then is, okay, great, we're attracting this capital, but where are the deals? Where are the communities that could best use this? So this is where having collaborators like Andrea Miller and what her organization does is absolutely, I think, innovative because we're really crossing the bridges between capital and business with true community engaged, empowered efforts to really help build underserved communities from within, from the leadership there. So with that in mind, I've had the pleasure of working with Andrea for the last 15 plus years or so on the national activist movement basis. And throughout the years, Andrea has put together some amazing organizations that are very productive because she's an incredible data wonk, organizer, activist, inside and outside the Beltway, so on, et cetera. And a few years ago, she created the Center for Common Ground with several outstanding direct in the community kind of projects to really engage, empower, particularly BIPOC communities throughout the southern U.S. and frankly, a lot more after that. So, Andrea, let me allow you to introduce what you're doing. Tell us a little bit more about Center for Common Ground and as well some of the projects you're working on, like the democracy centers and how that's where there's going to be a lot of convergence.
All right. Well, thank you, Steve. Thank you, Carl, for inviting me to join you this morning. Center for Common Ground really is an organization that is all about empowering BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color. So that's Black, Hispanic, Asian American, Native, White, Pacific Islanders, um, and other folks who live in the Southeast in the United States. So we work starting in Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, and we even swing over and go into Texas and up into Arizona. And we do work during election season on turning out BIPOC voters, making sure they know where to vote, when to vote, do they want to vote by mail, how to get their ballot, and all those real basic things that a lot of people who can't afford the internet, can't afford and know how to use computers can really just take advantage of it. It's something you do without thinking. In late 2020, we started up our Democracy Center program. So those programs are always in low income communities, and each one is solving a different community need. We've got many of our democracy centers run feeding programs because, as we say here, hungry people don't vote because government is not working for them. So, one of the first things we work on doing is resolving the whole hunger issue. We've even got a democracy center in Lynchburg that builds houses, literally new houses, real houses, not tiny houses, for people who were formerly homeless. And then they provide all the support services that they need because being homeless is a traumatic experience. So I'm immediately thinking of our Democracy Center in Florence, South Carolina, because they do some really amazing things. Number one, Florence, South Carolina is a community that struggles with clean, safe drinking water. So, one of the first things the Democracy Center down there did was they created clean, safe drinking water from solar because they are really big solar people. Now, the opportunity they would love to create a worker cooperative bottling company to be able to bottle the water they are producing and then sell it to their community and neighboring communities, as opposed to people are buying bottled water from all the big rich corporations. Another thing they're doing is Florence, South Carolina, when you get outside the city of Florence, this is some of the best, richest farmland. So they are building a lot of these solar panels on farmland, but they are also raising produce. And so another opportunity would be helping them with facilities where they would be able to prepare the produce so that they can sell fresh produce to local schools. This is what democracy centers do. What is your community need that doesn't require us to change a law, at least right now, or elect new people, at least right this moment? What can they do now and start helping their community begin to say, oh, wow, we as a community are powerful. Now, this is going to be really, really strange. We have a democracy center in, get ready, people, New York City. They are right behind Lincoln Center. Lincoln Center, that whole area, that's Millionaires Row. Well, the government in the 1950s and 60s thought it would be a brilliant idea to build low-income housing projects in the shadow of Lincoln Center. So that meant that all the people who have low incomes, who live in these communities, this housing, can't exactly afford to shop on Millionaires Row. Oh, wow, is that a problem? Low income people trying to buy groceries on Millionaires Row. So, what this Democracy Center is working on doing is they are working on building community rooftop gardens so they can have fresh produce.
So the Democracy Center for Common Ground is their role. Your role is to educate and really help voters, particularly those that are, shall we say, restricted from voting, to literally get out there and vote. So education, informing folks, letting them know how they can get the proper credentials to vote is a major part of the Common Ground's agenda. But it sounds like the Democracy Centers is one way to not only engage with the community, but it sounds like when you're done voting, you have the mechanism, the organizing, the community leaders coming together, that after you're done voting, come back and let's start working on some of the economic components, one you just described, for example. So to me, that's a brilliant kind of concept that I think has been long overdue. I started out as a community activist with the goal of rebuilding communities, and I recognized that you needed to get very politically involved in underserved communities. That just doesn't happen overnight. So the Common Ground through the Democracy Centers, I think, has a brilliant strategy, basically twofold. One, get out there and vote so we can start electing your own politicians, leaders. And when you get back, let's figure out how we can rebuild our communities, with the understanding that almost all disinvested communities have the same issues: housing, lack of jobs, lack of Black businesses, and a lot of other things. So to me, this is
And Steve, I'm going to add one more thing, and many of them are food deserts. And that is a huge problem. I mean, what gets more basic than being able to eat and having a choice of good, healthy food every day?
Right. So that problem can lead to solutions where local small business opportunities can happen. The question is, how does that happen, and how you bring the capital to it? So can you describe a couple other types of priorities you are working on under Center for Common Ground that also take into consideration not just getting out there and voting, but empowering and rebuilding and revitalizing the community from the community up?
Well, one of the things we were working on and are still working on is we love the idea of going back and bringing community banking back into the community. What's community banking? Credit unions were founded with the notion that they would be community banks, meaning the community members, and it's called a credit union because back in the 1920s, when labor unions were really getting going, what they found was banks would not lend money for housing to union members. So the unions were like, wait a minute, if we all put our money together, we can provide our own credit. And that's how credit unions were born. So credit unions are, get ready, people, they are not for-profit institutions. They are cooperatives. So the people who have money in the credit unions actually are the owners. So That's one of our concepts. That's a longer range concept. So, whatever it is that communities need, we are very, very happy to empower local people in that community who want to work on that issue and just keep bringing it up to the next level. Our very first democracy center in Hawkinsville ran a feeding program once a month. Well, people came to them and they said, we love that you run a feeding program once a month, but we're kind of hungry every day of the week. So they started basically a Rose's food pantry. And then they realized, well, we could even help the community more if we taught people how to prepare healthy food. And then they were like, oh, wait a minute, it's kind of hard to get healthy food here. So the needs of many, many communities are very, 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 very basic. So again, Hawkinsville sits literally outside the gates of an old plantation. What did they do on plantations? They grew food. So this is just very, 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 it's basic, it's grassroots. And I know you were saying this, Steve, it's year round. Elections don't last all year. Thank heavens. They're periodic through the year. So when we are not in election mode, we are in what can we do to lift up the community. Now, one of the other things we realized we always wanted to be very, very aware of is we don't want people to feel like we're just giving them something and they've got nothing worthwhile to contribute in return. So in Hawkinsville, when you showed up at the food pantry, they checked were you registered to vote. And if you weren't, they got you registered. Once they pretty much had all the people registered, then, well, we're having these events. We're going to be writing postcards, or we are going to be listening to some educational historical things because they're in a Black History museum. And then people really started to become interested, not just for the food, but all the other things that basically embellished, taught them the history of their community and their resilience. And it just became very, very important to do that. Roanoke does sort of the same thing. They operate out of an office building. They originally started purchasing food baskets on Thanksgiving for folks who weren't going to be able to have a good Thanksgiving. Then they expanded it. Who's got kids? It's cold in Roanoke in winter, so let's get hats, coats, gloves, warm socks for the kids. And your payment for receiving is there a neighbor or a friend that doesn't know about us yet? Let's bring them in. And it grew and it grew and it grew. And it grew to the point where there was a primary election and there was a Black woman running for state senate in Southwest Virginia. All right, Black woman, state senate, Southwest Virginia. People are going, whoa. She won her primary. She won her primary against the hand-picked successor of the incumbent.
So one of the things I'm most impressed with the Center for Common Ground, and again, as someone who's been deep in the community for literally decades and has a pretty good understanding that you can't just come in and say, we're here to help you people and bring some money with you. That just does not work. And I had the pleasure of working with Andrea with some of these strategies years ago, and it's just so wonderful to see this actually being implemented because one, It's difficult to build an infrastructure that's never been out there, particularly with a lack of resources. We all know that investing in underserved communities is not a very robust situation. My point here is, so I guess you decided years ago, and for at least 6, 7 years in several election cycles of which you can document the impact you had, you've literally chosen some techniques that are really deep within the community. In other words, you want to go out and register people or get them to the polls. Well, a lot of the major parties will send in some well-meaning, shall we say, non-neighborhood resident to come in, knock on doors, things like that. Now, that's nice, and you could say if you're trying to bring out the voters, but it doesn't quite work that way. So, Andrew, what are some of the techniques you use to really build not just transactional kind of relationships, but ones where you're really engaging in that neighborhood and letting them know that you do come together, there is hope to actually do change?
Oh, I love that question. All right, I'm going to go all the way back to Hawkinsville. They launched on December 20th, 2020, and they're in Georgia. Oh, what was going to be happening on January 5th? Well, that was going to be the Georgia runoff election. So they launched December 20th, 2020. 5 people worked in the Hawkinsville Democracy Center between December 20th, so Christmas, New Year's, January 5th. They knocked on 2,400 doors. You know how many conversations they had? They knocked on 2,400 doors. They had 2,100 conversations. When people heard, oh my God, this is the Newberry Institute. Oh, well, here, come in. We want to talk to you. My cousin's here. Let me go get my cousin.
Mm-hmm.
They were able to have conversations with people. Our ladies in Roanoke, when they knock on the doors, and we had a really, really colorful lady. She's since moved to DC. I want you to picture this: an older Black woman who favors African garb, the headdress, the brightly colored clothes, with a tiny miniature poodle in a baby carriage. All right. She would knock on the door, and her opening would be like, hey, I'm Zetta. I live over on Calhoun Street. Immediately establishing, hey, whatever you're going through, I live a few blocks away. I'm experiencing the same thing. You and I, we are the same. Do you have 5 minutes to talk to me about what could make our community better? And, my question would be, all right, who can't find 5 minutes to talk to Zetta?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, Andrea, this conversation starts off with democracy as a centerpiece term that's being used. And I think most people, when they hear that, they're thinking only of politics. And you are using the term across the entire community. And it's one of the things that Bill Houston is chipping in this morning, is pointing out that democracy applies to funding, food, housing, everything. That if you basically don't have access to these fundamental things, then you haven't truly achieved democracy. And politics is just one of those. But it's interesting because as you talk about empowerment, and as we've looked at investing in communities, the kind of the thing that comes through continuously is if you don't control it, if you don't have it local in your backyard, then the profits, the benefits are almost always going somewhere else. And therefore, the decision making on what should be done is done by somebody else. So it's always a matter of bringing it home, bringing it to your backyard in order for you to have it within your control. And that becomes the basis for the democratization of funding and food and everything else.
Yeah. And that is really, really, really true. When you talk about politics is kind of the methodology of people getting themselves elected into government. And government exists at a number of different levels. Right now, we're kind of focused on the top of the federal government, the president and the vice president. But there's also the Congress, and there's the Senate, and then there's state government, the state house, the state Senate, and then there's local government, your city and your county government. And through democracy, individuals and collected groups of individuals, we get to choose, what does our government look like? What are its priorities or not? And that's what is so important. And for people who feel forgotten by government, is it really strange that they don't really feel like they even need to bother to participate because their voices are ignored? No one cares what they think. So, again, that's why we start with the small stuff. If you're hungry, okay, we're 501c3. We can get people to donate food. We can raise money for food, and we can start getting you fed. Once we take care of that basic human need, now we can start looking at, what will it take for you to get a local grocery store in your community that carries fresh produce? What does that take? What does that look like?
One of the other, I think, real values of the Center for Common Ground's agenda is the intent is not to get everyone motivated, get to the polls, and then hopefully celebrate election victories. It doesn't stop there. You continue. So it's not a based on political cycles. It's beyond. So as you said, as you're motivating people to get out there, well, after the election, what do you talk about? It sounds like you're working with leaders that you brought together to work on the small food bank or some other small things that ultimately can be not only replicated but build into, well, the small food bank. How about a small well-being food black business, for example, things like that. So that to me again is you have the tremendous patience and the connectivity with communities, and you're building relationships. Now the question is, you could do all that, so what is missing? And this is where the RCI, which by the way, RCI Community Funds stands for Revitalization, yes, Catalyst, and Impact Funding. So part of our job is to get a whole bunch of capital together. But like I said earlier, well, great, where do we place it in the community? Now, I did all my work and development in DC. I know DC and my area quite well. But how do we go to communities that really need this capital and find the leaders? And again, this is where it's a great infrastructure building process you're building here. So if we do raise this capital, and our capital source is going to say, well, how and where should we trust that you're going to be putting it in the right place? Well, the relationships we have with deeply rooted and very active and credible organizations like yours that's been around now for several years, that is a great match that we want to build. We want to build that bridge to help bring in the necessary tools with the understanding that best revitalization has to come from the community.
Right. People that live in the community have to have identified what are our pain points. That's why we ask the question, what would make the community better for you and your family? What do you need? And people tell us. And then when it is election time, a number of our democracy centers now are holding candidate forums. Cobb County, they became the masters of the candidate forum, where they would be able to get candidates from all parties to show up, and they could pack a room with 200 and 300 people, and people would have their little palm cards. All right, Mr. Candidate for XYZ, what are you going to do about this? Our community is very concerned about this. Again, when communities cannot articulate their needs, when they can't seem to understand what it is that they want, it's very easy for people to ignore them. You don't want anything. But once they organize their wants and their needs, and as a community, they agree, this is our list, this is what we need to fix, then they start with the candidates when they're running for election. And normally there's a couple of candidates that notice this and notice the community seems to be kind of organized. And then they, talk to community members and we'd like to work with you on this. So we teach our leaders, all right, you get people to agree to work with you on this issue, and then they get in office. And now when they've had their inauguration and you show up that first day, all right, which one of our issues are we going to work on first? If they don't know your name anymore, then okay, there's going to be another election coming on, and we are going to have to find somebody to run against you because you don't get it. You don't care about our community. If you are not successful, then we teach them how to look at it. Were they not powerful enough? Were they the only voice out there asking for it? All right, where are the communities next door? Do they need the same thing? Let's go over and talk to them. Hey, I live over here in Dougherty County, and we just elected so and so, and they were willing to work with us on ding, 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 and ding. Are these interests in your communities? Yeah, we got the same problem. We're right next door. Go across the street and we're in our county. We care. And that is how it spreads. The communities go out, and it starts inside a community. It starts inside a neighborhood, and then it spreads, and then it goes across a county. And then people start looking at what can we do. The other thing we work with people on is we want you to understand what's going on in your legislature. Are the people who allegedly, notice I said allegedly, represent you, are they introducing laws that this is going to benefit your community, or is it going to hurt your community, or is it just going to benefit them? It doesn't hurt you, but it doesn't help you, but boy, they benefit. And we start teaching people how to look at what is going on. There's a bigger picture here. What's going on with the outside forces that are impacting your community? What can you change by election? What can you change by the simple childhood principle of annoyance? I'm going to keep asking until either you force me to stop asking or I get what I want.
Oh, Mom, do I have to go out and vote? Well, that's another great component that you have mastered very well, and that is education training. It really training the trainers. That is incredibly effective. And
I'm a teacher.
Yeah, exactly. So that's very convenient because there's a lot to be taught. And it seems that when you teach, then it becomes exponential because you've built up tens of thousands of volunteers. And to give us a little sense of the scale, or some of the techniques you use and the scale you built in a very relatively short period of time with probably a lot less resources than you really need. So tell us a little bit about scale, your techniques.
Okay. Well, I'll do the education because we really worked on scaling that. Number one, we taught our leaders civics. They stopped teaching civics in school, 40, 50 years ago? I'm 70 years old. They taught me civics when I was in school. Nowadays, young people, civics, what? Government? Huh? You're like, okay, we understand a good reason for how we got where we are. So you teach people the very basics of civics, and then you teach them the very basics of advocacy. In the old days, when I was over on the C4 side, I was a very effective lobbyist. Now that I'm on the C3 side, I can't lobby, but I can teach lobbying. And so we use that very, very simple framework of who are the most effective lobbyists in the world. And you see people trying to remember, oh, do I know the name of some really big lobbying law firm or something? It's like, no, most effective lobbyists in the world are children because they have their ask, they know what they want, and they're not going to stop asking. They are consistent and persistent until, like I said, you either make them stop asking or they get what they want. Most of the time, they get what they want. So when we are dealing with elected officials, it's the same thing. And when people go, you mean that's all it is? Yes, but first, you have to know what you want.
Mm-hmm. So once again, you are a multidimensional organization that takes all the factors in to be as productive and impactful as possible. So you're not getting people, you're not registering people to vote, which people could register, but they don't vote. You're doing a lot of things, really educated.
And Steve, I'm going to interrupt you there. We never allow the word register to vote to exist in our vocabulary. It is register and vote. It is a two-part thing.
Precisely.
You can't vote if you're not registered. And if you register and don't vote, what was the vote? What was the point?
Exactly. So again, you're not just educating, but you're actually using peer as to reach out. Give us an example of the just some of the numbers that you reach out to. I mean, you work with tens of thousands of volunteers.
We have 85,000 volunteers.
85,000 volunteers. How many postcards do you typically send out in a cycle? Phone calls, texts, things like that?
Okay. All right. Now, in 2020, that was our last presidential year. In 2020, we were basically 2 years old. We had started in 2018. So in 2020, we're 2 years old. We sent 9.4 million postcards. In 2024, we only had 8,500 volunteers. No, that's not true. We had 45,000 volunteers. In 2024, now that we have got 85,000 volunteers, our goal is to send 12 million postcards to Black voters. Mm-hmm. And we do not tell people who to vote for. It's merely, this is why you're voting. This is when early voting is. And here's the phone number of your registrar in the event you are rural and don't have internet, or you are older and don't use computers. So everybody's got a phone and knows how to use it. We make sure that our voters get the information they need to vote. I see some of the dumbest literature come from political campaigns and political parties. Vote, and then they say election day. Well, in Virginia, we have 45 days of early voting. No, we don't just vote on November 5th. We start voting here in Virginia in 10 days. Our first day of early voting is actually it's no, it's September 20th, 15 days. We start voting on September 20th. So when I vote, I have to keep the I voted sticker in my car so I don't try to go vote again. Because we're doing get out the vote. And I'm like, did I vote in this election, or am I like having deja vu of some past elections? Like, oh yeah, I voted in this election because the little I voted sticker has a date on it. All right, I'm good for 2024. And then also, early voting information is only available on the internet. If you got your little registration voter card, it tells you where you vote on election day. If you don't have internet or have a friend that has internet, you don't know where early voting is. You don't know when it's open.
Mhm, mhm.
We make sure our voters have access to that information. It is all about the voter. And people want to say, oh, postcards don't work. Well, yeah, if you send a plain white postcard that you've printed on the back and it looks like some government junk where people are like, I don't owe any money and I'm not getting any, and they throw it away. Our postcards, these our 2024 postcards, are art. They are actually done by real artists that I have their art hanging on my wall. Chuck Sperry, there's a new young artist, Amir Kadar, give them a shout out. And they're beautiful. People see these cards and they're like, what is this? And they're going to turn it over. They're handwritten and they're going to read it. Let me give you a number. You're going to love this number, Steve. In 2020, we worked in Mecklenburg, North Carolina. Charlotte is in Mecklenburg County. In 2020, there were about 238,000 registered Black voters. Well, 160,000 of them turned out on election to vote in the 2020 election. We sent 2.8 million postcards into North Carolina. Basically, we sent a postcard to every Black voter in North Carolina. Now, we did not work in North Carolina in 2022. People in North Carolina said, we got this, go, spend your resources in some other state. So Georgia was like, hell, please come back to Georgia. So we went back to Georgia. Turnout in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina in 2020, 97,000. So from 160,000 in 2020 down to 97,000 in 2022. So Black voters in Mecklenburg County was like, can you come back? Please come back.
So in states where elections are won by literally just tens of thousands of votes, it's clear to see how you make an impact, particularly in Georgia, 2020, where you could show the metrics of where you're most active. Let's just say that proof is in the pudding. What it required was an organization that, like yours, that really got deep into the community. And that's just let me kind of mention how and why we're interested in working with you is and building this bridge with you is you already setting up this infrastructure. So why would a community investment organization want to get plugged into the infrastructure you're building? Well, it makes a lot of sense. You're building it. Our principles, our intentions are aligned. And rather than us, reinventing our own wheel, let's do the collaboration of the kind of work you're doing. And the work you're doing, again, as a long-term activist at a national level, let's just say that not too many organizations like you have the patience and can stretch a dollar so much and build a small army to do this that is intended to be here for the long term. You're building the infrastructure. So we want to supplement that. So one thing I want to just really quickly point out too, because ours is a kind of a multifaceted relationship in that we, like you, want to educate communities as to how to raise capital. Crowdfunding is a great democratic way to raise capital, particularly that goes into local investments, but it's small and a lot of people don't know it. So working with you to tap into the huge audiences you have, would be a natural alliance for us for our mutual purpose. The one thing I do want to mention too that we haven't really formally announced is because we're working on it is we're putting together a RCI, what we're going to call the RCI Academy, which will be a nonprofit. We'll be working in an alliance with the Center for Common Ground. And the nonprofit is intended to literally train, educate, hold the hands of folks in the community that know what they're doing, but just don't have the kind of expertise that we have. Bill Houston, one of our partners, has been teaching and been a leader in crowdfunding. So we want to bring all that together. And then when we tie into a common ground, we're not just looking at one or two communities, but common ground, you are going to be growing throughout dozens of underserved communities, disinvested communities. That's the relationship we're looking to build here. And rarely do activist organizations match up with social entrepreneurs. We are a for-profit, certainly with a huge social agenda, but the common denominator here is economic equality requires all of us working together. We can't silo this. You're building an infrastructure that we can help leverage into much greater impact. Because again, you've got people in power and leadership on the ground. We're helping bring in tools from the outside. And then hopefully that becomes a whole new way of rebuilding communities, whether the politicians support us or not. So,
and the collaborative effort in Georgia, because you referenced Georgia, I don't live in Georgia, but we were partnered up with Georgia Team Unity. They went and got 78 NAACP chapters, Black Voters Matter, virtually every Black organization in Georgia, the Divine Nine, and they said, we are going to coordinate and work together and get this done. And they did it again in 2022. So again, remember, and this is Georgia now. In 2020, Georgia elected 2 Democratic U.S. senators. And it's not just 2 Democratic U.S. senators. Georgia sent a Black man and a Jewish man to the U.S. Senate. And then North Carolina came to me and they said, we want to be like Georgia. How did they do that? I said, number one, they stopped all working separately and they all came together. And North Carolina is working on that. I can't show you a picture, but I got this fabulous photograph from one of our board members who runs our private label print shop. And the photograph was 2 pallets with these boxes piled 3 rows high of 150,000 postcards on the way to the D9 members in Georgia. So what's different this cycle is in 2020, our volunteers from California, New York, Illinois, and the West Coast, and the New England predominantly sent all the postcards. In 2024, the democracy centers are leading the charge on sending postcards, and they're going out locally. Those communities are rising up and they are standing on their own 2 feet, fighting for themselves.
Mm-hmm. All very exciting. And we really look forward to building on this. So within your communities, what would you say is the aside from affordable housing, which we know is needed all over, what are your democracy centers or your communities telling you is the most pressing type of economic activity that they really want to embrace and build on themselves? Small businesses, what types of businesses?
A lot of people, a lot of our communities have added good jobs. So they've got affordable housing, they've got good jobs. We know a number of them are working on, we need good, fresh fruit, because in Georgia, there are, I believe, 17 counties in Georgia where they do not have a hospital. I mean, wait a minute. How can you have a county with tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people, and you don't have a hospital? If someone gets sick, the nearest hospital is 2 to 3 hours away.
So wellness centers, child care centers, food desert related kind of
Yes,
alternatives. Uh,
yes.
that's a pretty big,
There's a lot of opportunity across a lot of different sectors, and
exactly.
there are people in those communities. The other thing about the South is many people in the 50s, 60s, and even 70s left the South to go west or north where there were, quote, the good paying jobs. Well, those people are retiring, and you know what? They can sell a home in California and buy 3 or 4 homes back in the communities where they used to live. So you've got a lot of people going home. So you've got a lot of experience in business, in banking, in everything that is coming home. And while they may not want to directly run a business, they're potentially on the ground mentors that are right there in those communities that can help the younger people. The other thing that these good jobs will do is they will stop the brain drain that goes on in the southern communities where you've got bright young people, but there's no good jobs in the community where they were born and raised, and they are forced to leave. This starts giving people real alternatives. With the infrastructure bill, we are building broadband infrastructure in some of these very rural communities, making it possible for young people to choose to stay in their communities and be able to do remote work.
Mhm. So this is not an overtly political show, but you just mentioned how the IRA money has helped provide additional hope and, of course, real capital. And IRA money is really, from my experience, is really designed and getting into the communities. So my quick point is that this election, and again, we're not talking about politics necessarily, but there's a choice between continued this type of investment or the other alternative, which is forget any kind of additional real investment and of course muting hope and outcomes. So indirectly or directly, getting people to help make that choice, hopefully in a way that we all would agree with, I assume, then really helps accelerate the kind of work we're doing, helping build infrastructure, direct capital to communities, and partnering up with those in communities like you that know what's going on. So that's really a big question that's I guess, issue that we really have in our own hands if we get out there. And I know it's a big, important thing, role that your organization has.
All right, all right. Let me make an observation. I am looking at the three of us, and
Mhm.
we are all baby boomers. We have 4 more years where we are the largest voting bloc in the country. And in 4 more years, that's the next presidential election, it will be the millennials who will be
Yeah.
the biggest voting bloc that there is. So we literally are the dying breed.
So we need to hand off much more functional infrastructure to the next generation. And again, that's where our value is. We're experienced. We have relationships. We know the ins and outs of how to do this, and it's very difficult. But again, kudos to you and your entire leadership and network. Very broad, eclectic, pretty women run. Another nice.
We're like 96% women.
So that's pretty cool. The cross into faith-based communities, all that stuff. So you've done a great job putting all this together. Now it's our job to help bring capital to reinforce that kind of network that you've built up in a way that's not a one-off or one election cycle, but absolutely true systems change.
Yeah, so Bill has given us an accolade here of great show today, and
Thanks, Bill.
we always attribute that though to our guest because Steve and I are just guys who go out there and do stuff. But I think today's show is demonstrating to people that one, they have to rethink the word democracy and how it applies to everything. And the key thing for rebuilding these communities is to kind of do reclamation in the
Yes.
form of bring that business home, look at every business that you're buying products or services from. This some Bill bangs on all the time. If you're buying something from outside your community, you're exporting wealth from the community. So the more we can do to create a business in the community, owned by the community or owned by somebody who lives in the community, then now we're putting stakes in the ground. We're rebuilding, so to speak, in the same way of putting up a building foundation. And on that foundation, then everybody gets a chance to participate in the democracy as it's being defined. Roof over our head, food on the table, jobs to work at, all those things that we want to see. And I totally agree with Steve's observation that you've done so much great work to get people thinking as activists in the sense of I can take back my community. I can make my community the way I want my community to be. And I appreciate your having political shows with these politicians where they actually have to listen to you instead of you getting a mandate down from them on what their platform is. I'm not that familiar with that type of a setting. I usually just sit there and go, okay, when you're done talking, I'm going to turn the TV off and go home. So I think it's great that you're getting people to come together and think about their issues and prioritize what's important to them. But a lot of what we're hearing today is what we've been talking about within RCI is let's get local businesses in place again in the communities. And if we do that by properly placing money in the community, then more good things will happen beyond the work that you're already doing.
Mm-hmm. And inversely, capital sources are more likely to bring in larger amounts when they know there's a lot of mitigating insurance invested in these communities. And again, in my experience, dozens of years of redeveloping the most underserved, disenfranchised, crime-ridden communities in DC, the big key that I keep teaching people in is you have to identify work with the community leaders. And if you don't, then go on to another community. So that's very important. And again, another opportunity we have of working with an infrastructure, an ecosystem that Andrew is building that really complements what we're trying to do. That is create impact with as little risk, but with maximum outcomes in underserved communities, of which there's so many of them. This is a huge economic as well as social opportunity.
As well as political opportunity, because once people feel their power, they are not going back.
And politicians tend to listen a little more when they see economic or successes or other things happening in their community, and they can't pay lip service anymore. They have to listen to the local doers that are getting stuff done. I've seen that, and this is a mechanism, a platform that will increase that kind of adjustment in power, I guess. For lack of
Yeah. And what was exciting for us is a couple of our democracy center leaders are actually thinking about, and one actually ran for office. So again, when the people that you choose not to listen to, suddenly they're appearing on the ballot against you, it's like, whoa, yeah, keep not listening at your own peril.
Exactly.
Well, thank you very much for being with us. We're at the end of our hour. For those in the audience, thank you for participating today, and would point out to everyone that this show is recorded. It is going to be available for people to watch over and over and over again now that we have this crystallized message that we want to get out to everyone. So thank you, Andrea, for being on the show. Any last statements, Steve, before we sign off?
Yes, before we go, Andrea, your website and how can people help you with the task at hand over the next 2 months?
Well, you can visit our website, centerforcommonground.org. And on our website, there is an action section where if writing postcards is your thing, postcards is there. It will tell you everything you need to know. We are making phone calls into our states. If that's your thing, go ahead and choose that. And of course, if you don't have time, but you have treasure, we would love to get donations. And there is a great big donate button on our website. You're going to love our donate link, givebutter.com/CFCG 2024.
Invest in democracy, invest in our communities, invest in a more equitable future. Centerforcommonground.org.
Thank you very much, and thank you to our audience, and we'll see you next week on Community Revitalization Show, brought to you by RCI Community Funds.